So I want to go back to these two concepts here. Let's unpack it a little bit more. Just Baudrillard, simulation, simulacrum, that whole idea. So can you sort of unpack that just in a generic sense? How would you teach just that concept in isolation without referring to COVID or anything else? Like in a classroom, the 101, Baudrillard 101.
So it's really this, it's grounded in this kind of historical account of, I guess, what we might call representation, right? And this idea that you move through different phases of representation, right? And there's a meme of this, right? That, where there's a representation that is referential in some sense.
Okay.
And then there's a representation that of representation that refers to the world, or representation that refers to some kind of model or construct of the world. And then finally, there's a representation that refers only to itself, right? And that is, and this is the final phase, right? The sort of third order, or the phase of simulation, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think, and importantly, it's hyper reality. So it's not, and the idea is not simply that it's a substitute for reality, but that reality itself becomes pervaded by this logic, right? And so it becomes impossible to separate. Again, this is the logic of the model, right? Which we can think of just as, take that New York Times map, right? Yeah. Where you generate a statistical model, plug a bunch of numbers into it, and create this representation. But this representation isn't referential in any meaningful sense. It doesn't. It creates a reality rather than
why is it not referential?
Rather than referring to it.
Why is it not referential?
Well, because it. If you think about all of the, you said to not necessarily apply to COVID, but the point would be that it functions not by representing the world, but by extracting certain ideal variables and then creating an autonomous world that functions on its own, right? And so this, it doesn't, it doesn't represent the world in any simple sense, right? It's not a map in the sense of a map that attempts to point us to things in reality. Rather, it's a sort of autonomous construct that's driven by its own logic, right? And that then that logic infiltrates reality itself, right?
So how does this infiltrate our logic? How does it infiltrate our reality? In other words, what does it cause socially?
Yeah. So it causes I guess what's kind of interesting about it, and this isn't necessarily in Baudrillard, but in our contemporary reality, as we see this kind of prevalence of the model playing itself out. I would say it causes a kind of madness, right? Because it causes a kind of incapacity to, it causes a madness in which the sort of logic of the model is it supersedes and overrides even what we might take as kind of basic common sense, right? And becomes becomes sort of obligatory. So I would say in our current situation, it causes a kind of madness, right? And if you look at this document that, like, the CDC's slideshow, it's a document of that kind of madness. I would say that this slideshow that just came out, it's so bizarre and convoluted. But it assumes all of these premises and then sort of fabricates this construct of reality, which then goes on to actually reshape our daily lives in the world that we live in.